we'll be using the Zoom interpretation function, and it's for anyone who isn't comfortable in both English and Spanish. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Wendelin, mis pronombres son ella y nosotros, y vamos a interpretar esta noche con nuestra compa Rachel, y vamos a usar la función de interpretación de Zoom, y es para cualquiera que no se sienta cómodo en español e inglés. Now we'll give a quick overview of how to access the interpretation function. Ahora le daremos un breve resumen de cómo acceder a la función de interpretación. The interpretation function is activated and you should see a globe on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. La función de interpretación ya está activada y debe de ver un globo en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. If you're joining from a tablet or phone, you can click on More or where there are 3 dots on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Si estás usando un tablet o un teléfono inteligente, puede hacer clic donde dice más o en los 3 puntitos abajo en la parte derecha de su pantalla. Y haga clic donde dice interpretación de idiomas. Simply choose your language channel and then don't forget to click on Done. Simplemente elija su canal de idioma y haga clic en Finalizado. So again, just a reminder that unless you are fluent and comfortable in both English and Spanish, everyone should be on an interpretation channel. Otra nota, solamente para acordarle que si no entiende el inglés y el español, debe de elegir un canal de idioma inglés o español. Ahora, otra nota, hay una opción para silenciar el audio original, en cuyo caso ya no escucharás la voz del presentador. Just a note that there is an option to mute original audio, and in which case you will no longer hear the presenter's voice under the interpretation. So our compa, Rachel, is on the Spanish language channel now. And if you could, just make sure that you can hear them. And if you cannot, just feel free to send a message by chat to our tech person, who is Susie Jimenez. So, nuestra compa Rachel está en el canal de español y déjenos saber si le puede escuchar, y si tiene algún problema técnico, puede mandarle un mensaje a Susie Jimenez. Y ahora vamos a empezar la parte simultánea. Now, you should be listening to our compa Rachel on the Spanish channel if you need to, or you should be listening to me on the English channel. Creating a multilingual space is a shared responsibility. Language justice includes the right everyone has to communicate in our languages and a respect for the language rights of all peoples. And we want to begin by acknowledging all the languages here today, as well as the languages of the indigenous peoples of this land, the Munsee Lenape. Now, equitable communication in a bilingual space is a shared responsibility among all of us, and here's what you can do to help. Now, please silence your mic when you are not speaking, and look out for communications from the logistics support person or interpreters in case they need to ask you to pause or to speak more slowly. And so if that comes up, this is what you'll see us do. If you see us do that, please do it with us so that we can get the attention of the speaker more quickly. Now just remember to speak at a moderate pace, pause often, honor those commas, take deep breaths, especially between speakers or between languages. Now, remember, it's impossible to interpret when more than one person speaks at a time. So if we hear more than one voice, you will see us use this signal, which means one diva, one mic. So I'm seeing a question here from the panelists that's asking us to repeat, asking for instructions on what to do if you want to listen in English. So again, you should see a globe on the bottom right-hand side of your screen that says interpretation. There you can choose the language that you want to listen in. If you're joining in on a tablet or a smartphone, you'll find 3 dots or the word more on the bottom right-hand side on your screen. And you would choose your language and remember to press done. Now, remind you to limit the use of the chat. If you need to, please we ask that the presenters read everything that is in the chat so that it can be interpreted. Again, if you have any trouble, any technical issues, please send a message to Susie, who is the person that might be able to help you with that. And then just a quick note on gendered language. So folks listening in Spanish will have noticed that we're attempting to use the E ending. So instead of the traditional A or O. So for instance, when we say saludes or bienvenides, and it's not a pronunciation error, but rather an intentional effort to create inclusive spaces where we aren't making assumptions about everyone's gender identity. Now, an additional note here that in these Corona times, we are working and living with our children, with our elders, with our pets, and we want to create space for each other in that reality. And lastly, the languages that we love and live in are constantly evolving as we are, and we welcome any feedback. Thank you, and we are done. Now, Julie, if and when you're ready, just remember to please assign me as an interpreter.
Okay, I'll do that right now. I have to stop sharing my screen to do so. So just 1 second. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. And welcome everyone. I'm so pleased to have everyone here tonight. My name is Julie Noble and I am the Environmental Education and Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston and also the project manager for the Kingston Climate Action Plan 2030. Thanks so much for joining us, and I want to thank the Kingston Language Justice Collaborative for working with us tonight. So I'm going to be moderating this meeting. This meeting is being recorded and it will be posted at engagekingston.com following this meeting. And that will also be the location where all of the information related to the Climate Action Plan update will be found. And I'm joined today with Citizens for Local Power, with Cadmus Group, with other members of the City of Kingston and staff of the City of Kingston, and with representatives of the Novo Foundation, as well as the Project Advisory Committee for the Climate Action Plan. So welcome to everyone, and thank you all for being here. Gwendolyn went over most of the meeting logistics, but again, if you have any questions whatsoever, whether they are tech issues or otherwise, you are free to type them into the chat, whether you are typing them in Spanish or English, and we will address those tech issues immediately, and we will have a period for question and answer later on. So any questions and answers that are typed into that chat function will be addressed later on in the meeting. I encourage you to engage through the chat. This is our first meeting for this project, and it will be one of many, many options for the community to engage in the process, but I encourage you to use that chat function. I also want to thank, in addition to those I've listed so far, I want to thank Radio Kingston for the opportunity today to participate in an interview to promote this event. And I really want to give a big thanks to Summer Smith, the city's communication director, for helping us to pull all of this together. So as moderator, I'm going to walk you briefly through the agenda. I'm going to hand it over then to Mayor Steve Noble to welcome officially, and then we'll come back to moving through our presentations. I'm going to give a background after the welcome on the Climate Action Plan, how we got here. And then I'm going to pass it over to Ben Butterworth from Cadmus Group to give us a roadmap to Climate Action Plan 2030. Citizens for Local Power will follow, and they are the team, the part of the team that is really serving the role to get the community involved in this Climate Action Plan update. And they will walk us through community engagement plans, a roundtable and question and answers, and then next steps. So I'm going to pass it over now to Mayor Steve Noble for a brief welcome.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. The climate action planning process has been critical to the Kingston success in being able to be the climate smart community that we want to and that we've worked so hard to become. I'm really proud of all of the work of our team, and in particular, I'd like to thank Julie Noble as our environmental education and sustainability coordinator, and all of our staff who have helped us to meet these goals over the last 10 years. Through this hard work, we were able to be certified as a silver climate smart community. We are currently at the highest level here in New York State, and that's something that I know that we as a team are really proud of, and something that I know our community sees each and every day as they interact with municipal government. This process of creating a new climate action plan for the next 10 years will help us move the needle even further to be a resilient, sustainable community that takes into account climate change, sea level rise, and the energy use and how we obtain it and how we use it so that we can do better. Because we know that the best way to make a difference is at the local level, and we're ready to be the example that other communities across New York State and across the country can use. And with the team that we've assembled and with the support that we've received from our partners at the Novo Foundation, I think everyone is going to be engaged in this process, and the level of community involvement with our partners at CLP will go a long way in making sure that voices across our community are heard, and that we really, in essence, co-author this plan with the community. And that's something that we have strived for, and I know we'll just make sure that we'll create a better plan for now and for the future. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you for being a part of our initiative. And please stay engaged with us as we go through this process. And I look forward to meeting with all of you in person at some point in the future. But for now, I appreciate everyone taking part in this virtual world. And so, Julie, I think I'm throwing this back to you.
Thanks so much for your time. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through now what we have done to get to where we are, how we are here, and what the Climate Action Plan 2030 really is. And in order to do that, it's important to understand where we've been. And so the city of Kingston has come really far with environmental sustainability. Here's just a little bit of a map of what we've done. Back in 2007 and 2008, that's when our first environmental educators were hired. That's when we first came on board to start this programming and this plan of moving towards a more sustainable Kingston. And from there, things spiraled. We started a conservation advisory council to help to guide policy. We started what at the time was called a Climate Smart and Green Jobs Task Force to help to move forward climate initiatives. And we were able to secure funding in 2011 to hire a climate analyst. And that climate analyst worked solid for us for a whole year on crafting our first greenhouse gas emissions inventory and our first climate action plan. The climate action plan that we have been operating under for since 2012 when it was adopted. That climate action plan was very much based on a number of different components of sustainability, which I'll review in just a moment. And it gave us goals to set for emissions reductions to 2020, which is where we are now and why we're moving on to our new Climate Action Plan 2030 to move forward with 10 years more of additional goals. That original Climate Action Plan was very much mitigation focused. So it didn't have a lot about how to adapt. Adaptation plan didn't exist. So we convened to pull together a Planning for Rising Waters plan, which was a focus on our waterfront and how we as a community that is so connected to our water can continue to have that connection, but to be prepared moving into the future. The actions that we've taken up until then with our climate action plan certified us a bronze climate smart community in 2014, which was the highest level at the time. And subsequent to that became the first city that was a clean energy community in the state and the first city certified as a silver climate certified community in the state. Silver certification is the highest that you can achieve. We are at that level. And once gold is available, we will push for that as well. Environmental specialist was hired back in 2018, and we continue to build on this programming. And now we are here in just past 2020, moving towards a climate action plan to get us to 2030. So what is the Silver Climate Smart Community? What have we done? What was our first climate action plan about? And how does that differ from this climate action plan? Our first climate action plan was very robust. It had a ton of information and a ton of recommendations and policies and practices and recommendations for how to get towards our goals of emissions reductions. And in that time, we focused on 6 major components, buckets of focus for environmental sustainability: outreach and education, energy, transportation, land use, sustainable resource management, and adaptation and resilience. And under each of those different areas, we have had across departments throughout the city and into the community, folks working on these different initiatives. Not just my department, not just, the Climate Smart Kingston Commission, but across all divisions. But what we have seen is that a lot of the work thus far has really been very much government operations focused and working on how we can improve our own house, make sure that we're walking the walk. This climate action plan, the next climate action plan, 2030, is focusing on systems change in the community. How can our community be more sustainable? How can we embrace all of this, embrace change? And so, in partnership with the Novo Foundation and Citizens for Local Power, in conjunction with Cadmus Group, the City of Kingston is crafting Climate Action Plan 2030. Our goal is to take work that's been done so far. Cadmus Group and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory have put together a 100% renewable energy procurement plan. We're taking that, the foundation of the original Climate Action Plan, and work done from then to move forward a new Climate Action Plan. And the purpose will be to build a sustainable, resilient, equitable, and independent energy, food, economic, and social system in the community of the City of Kingston. So our goals with this new Climate Action Plan, it needs to be bold. We are a leader in the state. Communities call me daily to ask about how we work on these projects, and we want to continue to be a bold leader. It needs to be community-wide. It needs to be inclusive and equitable. Everyone that lives in this community is part of this, and everyone needs to benefit from it and participate. Transformative so that we are seeing actual systems change and getting to our goals. We need to engage the community, and that is why we have put so much effort in this process towards embracing and taking on Citizens for Local Power, whose sole purpose and primary purpose is to engage the community in this process. And all the while, we need to be able to achieve deep greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We are setting Kingston on the course to meet or exceed New York State's emissions reductions, which are 85% below 1990 levels by 2050 and 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Ben will speak to this a little bit more in just a moment, but it's really critical that we engage all sectors of our community, not just the city, all the residents, neighborhood associations, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, throughout the community, so everyone is on board with this. And this is the team. Myself as a project manager, and I work for the City of Kingston. Jessica Clegg is a project manager for Citizens for Local Power, and she has a team on her end as well. From the Cadmus Group, we have Farah Anderson and Ben Butterworth, who are our project consultants, and I have a fantastic project advisory committee, who are joining us today. People from throughout the community that want to see this successful and can weave into the community this effort. So I'm going to now, I'd like to introduce Ben from Cadmus. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to pass the host over to him so that he can present his information here.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Great. So yeah, I'll be presenting on Roadmap to Climate Action Plan 2030. As Julie mentioned, my name is Ben Butterworth. I'm with the Cadmus Group. My background and experiences with working on cities on climate action planning. Sorry about that. My panel's in the way. So yeah, excited to be working with Kingston on this project. Great. So yeah, topics we'll be discussing. We'll be talking about the 2010 versus 2019 community greenhouse gas inventory results. I'll be talking about emissions reduction target and the emissions forecast. I'll be talking about how local climate action fits into this picture, and I'll be talking about next steps. So jumping into the community scale greenhouse gas inventory and talking about the 2010 versus 2019 comparison. So starting off, why complete a greenhouse gas inventory? So the inventory is really important for understanding trends in community emissions since the last inventory was completed in 2010, and really a way to continue to track progress towards long-term emissions reduction goals. Also helps develop a better understanding of overall current emissions in Kingston across the community, and develop an accurate baseline to serve as the foundation for an emissions forecast out to the 2030 target year. So it's hard to have a forecast if you don't have an accurate baseline or starting point for that forecast to launch off from. So the taller bar on the left is community-wide greenhouse gas emissions in 2010. So Kingston was at just under 186,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2010. The shorter bar on the right is the community-wide greenhouse gas emissions in 2019, so just under 127,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So the big headline here is that there's been a 32% decrease in total emissions since 2010. So that's great news. The city set a target in the 2012 Climate Action Plan of a 20% reduction below 2010 levels by 2020. So the city's really on pace to exceed that target, even though we don't have the 2020 results yet. 2019 is the most recent year we have data for. But it's really great to see that 32% decrease in emissions since 2010. If you looked at what's happening on kind of a sector by sector basis, transportation is represented by the gray bars, and there's been a 31% decrease in overall transportation emissions between 2010 and 2019. There's been a 33% decrease in building emissions, which is represented by the blue bars on the left. And then it's hard to see, but waste is at the very top there. It's represented by the brown bars, and there's been a 14% decrease in overall waste emissions across the community. So all good news on this front. This is just another way to look at the data comparing the 2010 and 2019 emissions. So the larger pie on the left is the 2010 emissions broken out by source of emissions. The smaller pie on the right is the 2019 emissions broken out by source emissions. So just to walk you through the colors here. So the gray colors, that represents the transportation sector. So the lighter gray color is gasoline powered vehicles, and then the darker gray color is diesel powered vehicles. Natural gas emissions are represented by the two blue wedges. So the darker blue is all non-residential buildings, so thinking commercial or industrial buildings, while the lighter blue represents natural gas emissions from residential buildings. The red and pink wedges are other types of heating fuels, so heating oil, propane, kerosene, with the red representing non-residential buildings and the pink representing other fuels in residential buildings. Electricity is represented by the orange and the yellow wedges. So orange represents the non-residential buildings and yellow represents residential buildings. And then finally, waste is that small brown sliver you see making up 1% of emissions in both 2010 and 2019. So there's a few kind of key trends that are important to talk about when we're thinking about, what's happening with emissions, kind of big picture in Kingston. So on the electricity side, electricity is making up a decreasing share of total emissions. So electricity accounted for 15% of total emissions in 2010. That number is down to 9% of total emissions in 2019. So what we see is there's been a 15% decrease in overall electricity consumption across the community. But at the same time, there's been a 60% decrease in electricity emissions. So emissions are decreasing at a much faster rate in electricity than electricity consumption is. And what's really happening here is the greenhouse gas emissions per unit of electricity used, per unit of electricity generated, are decreasing. So really what's happening is, coal power plants are shifting to natural gas power plants, which are a lot less emissions intensive. And we're seeing a lot more renewable energy on the grid, whether it be hydroelectric or wind or solar. On the natural gas side of things, natural gas is making up an increasing share of total emissions. So there's 28% of total emissions in 2010, and it's now make up 35% of total emissions in 2019. So as the share of total emissions attributable to electricity decreases, the share of total emissions attributable to natural gas increases. So natural gas is kind of making up a bigger and bigger percentage of the overall pie as we move from 2010 to 2019. Interestingly, there's been a 14% decrease in total natural gas emissions between 2010 and 2019, but an 8% increase in residential emissions from natural gas. So a decrease in natural gas emissions in the commercial and industrial sector is really driving that overall decrease in natural gas emissions. On the transportation side of things, transportation has made up a relatively constant share of total emissions from 2010 to 2019. 42% of total emissions in 2010 and 43% of total emissions in 2019. Interestingly, there's been a 6% decrease in vehicle miles traveled, but a 31% decrease in vehicle emissions. So vehicle emissions are decreasing at a much faster rate than vehicle miles traveled. And what's causing this is the efficiency of vehicles has increased a lot from 2010 to 2019. So for example, gas vehicles have gone from 17 miles per gallon on average to 24 miles per gallon on average in the past, or that 9-year period. There's also a number of electric vehicles on the road in Kingston. There's about 200 electric vehicles currently on the road. So that's also helping reduce transportation emissions. So moving away from the greenhouse gas inventory results and talking about emissions reduction targets and emissions forecasts. So it's important to keep in mind the broader global and state level context. So the Paris Agreement and the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA. So the Paris Agreement, many of you are probably familiar with it, was adopted in 2015 with the goal of keeping global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. With a goal of also trying to limit temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the state level, so we have the New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, in 2019, setting the overall state target of carbon neutrality by 2050, and an interim target of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So carbon neutral by 2050 is really the key target to keep in the back of your mind. So 40% below 1990 by 2030, that's really hard to achieve. 100% below 1990 or carbon neutrality by 2050 is even more challenging. So that will require basically eliminating fossil fuels, not only for the electricity sector, but also from heating buildings and powering vehicles. So it's worth noting that there'll be some level of what's known as carbon sequestration to offset hard to eliminate emissions in the carbon neutrality scenario. So there's lots of lines on this emissions forecast graph, but don't worry, I'm gonna talk through all of them. So this is really trying to project out future emissions in Kingston out to 2030 using the data that we have historically in 2010 and 2019 from the community level greenhouse gas emissions. So that first line, the far line on the left, the black line, is the historical emissions from 2010 to 2019. And as we discussed, there's been a 32% decrease in emissions over that time period. So that's what's being depicted on the graph on the far left. The BAU, or business as usual emissions, this is the blue line. It's really factoring in growth in the community. So we expect population and jobs to continue to increase out to 2030. So the business as usual is really saying if nothing else change beyond the community just growing over the next 11 years, we would expect an 8% increase in emissions. However, there's also state policies that are helping Kingston reduce its overall emissions. Most notably of these are the Clean Energy Standard, which is New York's goal to have 70% renewable energy by 2030, and vehicle fuel efficiency standards at the state level that are really driving down emissions in the transportation sector. So with these state policies, what we're projecting from 2019 to 2030 is an 8% decrease in emissions, also known as 37.4% below 2010 levels of emissions, which is the first year that we have an inventory for the city of Kingston. So in comparison to the state target, the state target has this 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, which if you translate that to 2010 terms, so we can compare apples to apples, that's 37% below 2010 levels by 2030. So you can see that Kingston is really on track to kind of surpass the state's interim 2030 target. So the big takeaway here is, because of the large reduction from 2010 to 2019, Kingston is about on pace to reach the New York State 2030 interim target. However, that 2050 carbon neutral challenge still remains. So really, what can Kingston do to either exceed the 2030 interim state target and also put it on track to be positioned for reaching carbon neutrality by the year 2050? So that's a great segue to talking about local climate actions.
Can I, Ben, can I just have you pause for just 1 second? I just want to address something that's going through the chat. Please be mindful that if you are writing a note in the chat, you have the choice to choose either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So if you would like the chat question to go to all panelists and attendees, please choose that as on your drop down there. And Ben, I think that the interpreters are asking you to speak a little bit slower. So you have so much information to be shared. They need to be able to have you speak a little slower so they can interpret it. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. We'll just slow down a bit. Great. So organizing actions by strategy. This is just one way to organize actions within a climate action plan. So there's like kind of four main strategies that folks will typically kind of lump actions into in a climate action plan. So on the left, we have clean electricity supply. So clean electricity supply, that's really about how can Kingston reduce reliance on fossil fuels to generate electricity and increase reliance on renewable sources of electricity to power buildings, lighting, and transportation. Decarbonize buildings. That's really about how can Kingston reduce reliance on fossil fuels to generate heat and hot water in buildings through both increased energy efficiency and electrification of fossil fuel equipment. So switching that equipment from fossil fuel-based equipment to electric equipment. Sustainable mobility and land use. How can Kingston reduce emissions associated with transportation by reducing reliance on cars, relying more on active forms of transportation like biking and walking, and replacing internal combustion cars with electric cars. And finally, managing resources sustainably. How can Kingston reduce emissions associated with food production and consumption and waste disposal? And how can Kingston utilize land to effectively sequester carbon? So the vast majority of emissions are going to come in those that are captured in the greenhouse gas inventory are going to be in those first three strategies. So electricity, buildings, and transportation. However, managing resources sustainably is also really important. That captures, waste and food and preserving open space and sequestering carbon. It's also important to point out here that there's a link between clean electricity supply and decarbonized buildings and sustainable mobility. So as the electricity supply gets cleaner, it not only reduces emissions from devices and equipment that currently use electricity, but it also unlocks opportunities to reduce emissions in heating and providing hot water to buildings. So you can electrify equipment that currently uses fossil fuels. And it also opens the door for reducing emissions in transportation. Cars that were traditionally powered by gas or diesel can be powered by clean electricity instead. So if the electricity supply was coming 100% from coal-fired power plants, it wouldn't make sense to electrify building equipment or cars. But if Kingston is achieving 100% renewable energy in the near future, it makes a lot of sense from an emissions reduction standpoint to electrify equipment in buildings and electrify transportation through the use of electric vehicles. So the purpose of the next two slides is just to give you a sense of the type of actions that might be considered in a climate action plan, organized by the four strategies that I just walked through. So these are just examples to kind of get your gears spinning. They're really not recommendations of actions to include in the CAP, but just trying to provide you with some context. So in the clean electricity supply strategy, the example action here is establishing a community choice aggregation program. And what a community choice aggregation or CCA program really enables is the local government to pool the electricity load of residents and businesses and procure electricity on their behalf. So there's a number of benefits. It gives you greater local control of the energy mix. It also provides an opportunity to increase the percentage of renewables within that electricity mix at potentially lower energy prices. In the decarbonized building strategy, an example of an action that could be incorporated into a climate action plan is increasing the utilization of existing incentives to electrify equipment and appliances in homes and businesses. So there's some existing incentives out there and discounts out there currently through Central Hudson and Heat Smart Ulster Sullivan to replace fossil fuel powered equipment with electric equipment in homes and businesses. And the city could also collaborate with community organizations to drive increased participation among residents and businesses to really drive participation in those programs. So those are just two examples of actions, one in the clean electricity supply strategy and one in decarbonized buildings. For the next two strategies, so sustainable mobility and land use, an example action is increasing walkability and bikeability. So really implementing strategies that support biking, including the expansion of designated bike lanes, bike storage, and on-street bike racks, and also making walking and biking safer by redesigning streets. There's a number of things you can do. You can install roundabouts, you can widen sidewalks, speed tables to reduce motor vehicle speeds. And finally, managing resources sustainably. An example action is increasing local food production and self-reliance. So kind of removing political barriers and permitting barriers to local food production, including farming, raising livestock, poultry, and bees. Increasing number of participation in local farm stands are just some kind of example actions that you could think about in these 4 different strategies. So next steps. So this is what my team at Cadmus will be working on in the near to medium term. So working collaboratively with CLP, community members, and the CAP Project Advisory Committee and city staff to discuss and identify priority actions. Our team is going to be analyzing the top 5 to 10 priority actions to better understand the greenhouse gas emissions impact, cost impact, implementation next steps, really understand the feasibility of these actions and how they can really be implemented. Step number 3, developing a draft CAP and receiving feedback from community members and the CAP Project Advisory Committee. And by September, targeting a finalized climate action plan based on the feedback that we've received through that process and through the engagement process that CLP is helping to run. So with that, my presentation is over and I will pass it over to Jess.
I wondered, we don't have to do this, but I wondered there are a few questions like regarding your presentation specifically, Ben, if you want to spend like a few minutes talking about this before I get going.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you. So just so it's fresh in all of our minds, we had some good comments, like basically are the numbers for emissions, are they for all businesses, residents in City of Kingston or to a specific group?
Yeah, so the emissions that I showed in the 2010 and 2019 greenhouse gas inventories, yeah, they covered the entire community. So all residents, all businesses, all transportation occurring within the community boundaries.
Thanks. And that's from Lisa Mitten. And thank you for your question. And from Lorraine Farina, can you please define CO2 equivalent? Are you looking at PM 2.5?
Yeah, good question. So CO2 equivalent is a bit of a tricky concept, but there's 3 main greenhouse gases. So it's carbon dioxide, then methane, and then N2O. So the idea is to put all those gases into the same comparable unit. So that's what CO2 equivalent is doing. Those gases have different, what's known as global warming potentials. So for example, 1 pound of methane is about 20 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than 1 pound of carbon dioxide. So the CO2 equivalent metric is really just trying to put all those gases into the same unit, so you can kind of add them all up and compare them as a total without having to deal with all these different units.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I also just had a question from, or an advisory from Hugo, just for all of us, that fracked gas be used instead of natural gas. And I get it. It's just, yeah, something that, we might want to keep in mind.
Yeah, I will say it's not all fracked. Fracking does account for a large percentage of natural gas use, but yeah, it's not all fracked.
Right. No, that's a good point. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that presentation, and for I will share my screen.
I want to just note there certainly are many very valuable comments coming through the chat. We will address more during the Q&A portion of the meeting, and any that are not addressed during this meeting, we are recording the chat as well, and we will follow up with those questions outside of the meeting if we don't get to them today.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, just one second. I will launch my presentation. And yeah, thank you all, and thank you, Ben. I was just kind of thinking, like, it's good sometimes to answer questions immediately after the slides and make sure that we have total engagement with people. But my name is Jessica Clegg, and I am a coordinator with Citizens for Local Power, which is a locally based nonprofit in primarily Kingston, but also in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And our goal is to help communities in the Mid-Hudson Valley transition to a locally based clean energy economy. And so this has been a real positive role for us to work with the city of Kingston and help provide community outreach for what is a major step in the city's development. Obviously, the city has hit major milestones with their climate goals already, but we're just really proud to be able to work with them in order to take these climate actions to the next level. And we're happy to be a part of it. So yeah, so that's a little bit about what we do. We're working with the city. We're doing a Green Jobs internship. We are helping to inform the public about various utility changes and a rate case that's currently going on with Central Hudson. And we hope to be an advocate for any energy needs in this community. And our big role in this Kingston Climate Action Plan is to help engage you and the people that you serve. So if you have a community organization, we want to be in touch with them. We want to be in touch with all layers of the community in order to make sure that every voice is heard, and that we can implement all feedback from people in the community to engage in this community action plan. And yeah, so this comes to, we have launched a survey that we have sent via postcards that you can access with your phone. You can see the website there. You can access it here. We will share this link in the chat. And the purpose of the survey is that we want to get your priorities about where the direction of the climate action plan for the city should go, and make sure that your needs are heard and that this is a public collective plan that works for all of us. So our survey has been launched already, and we're going to send it around to everyone who participates here and has shared their contact information. And it should take under 10 minutes. You know, it's not too bad to complete. And we're going to collect the results of this survey, which basically categorizes what are the most pressing issues for you regarding climate action, be it food resources, transportation, energy efficient access to renovating your home, and just put it together and make sure that our partners, that Cadmus and Ben, who has just spoken so eloquently, that the Cadmus group has all those results available. And yeah, we hope you all fill it out. I mean, we're closing the survey on February 7th, and we'll be presenting a report officially to the city and to Cadmus, whom you just heard from. We will also report to you if you provide your information so that you can know what the other people in your community, what your community as a whole is thinking about, and to further align our goals so that we can all work together. And I would also note, and big thanks to our Spanish interpreters today. And this survey is accessible in Spanish. And if you just follow this link here and you go to the top upper right corner, you can decide whether you want to take it in English or Spanish. And that's very important to us. And we hope you share it. So now I'm going to sort of reduce my screen a little bit and just launch a poll. So I think I might need to stop the share for a second. So thank you for your, okay. So this is a poll that we're just gonna take care of just to get a sense of what people are thinking of who are on this call. And thank you so much for being on this call. So if you can take, I would say a few minutes to take this poll, and we'll talk about it in 3 minutes. I just got a note, can I resend the poll? I'm not sure if I can, but love to. I think this is a point to talk about what our results showed. And thank you all for participating. And thank you. So the entire survey is in the chat. This is just like a quick sketch in order to get a sense of the people who've been awesome enough to attend this meeting, care about the most and at this moment. And it's very illuminating. And this is also something that we're going to record. So the majority of people have said that energy efficient buildings are the most important thing at 27%. Close behind that is green jobs. And right behind that is increased local food production. And then we have clean electricity supply, which would involve more access to renewable energy sources. And, people put all of these things at, at a maximum. So it's definitely important that we consider all of these different goals in our plan. So I would like to take this opportunity at this moment to see if anyone has questions specific to what their priorities are with energy, and whether we can answer these questions in this moment. We have about another half hour. I'm going to take probably the last 10 minutes, but anyone who has further questions regarding the survey or panelists so far, we can field those right now.
And I wanted to point out, and thank you so much to everyone. I really am very, very thrilled with how much everyone is providing information and questions and thoughts and comments in the chat, and just taking a look at scrolling through there to really see what sort of topics people are most interested in understanding more about or concerned about. Things like land use, air quality, green buildings, heating and cooling, food waste, solid waste, economic impacts of sustainability, manufacturing, energy efficiency, and so many different things that have come up. This is really valuable to us. This is exactly what we need to really understand where to drive this next climate action plan. There's been a number of questions in there as well that I've seen, and I'll just take some of those. There were some questions about whether the data that was presented is for, one of the questions was whether it applies to Tech City and the changes there. The information that is in our greenhouse gas emissions inventory is for the city of Kingston proper. So there are certainly businesses, manufacturing, commercial, residential outside of the city of Kingston that still have Kingston, New York post office addresses, including places like Tech City, but that is not included. This is for Kingston proper only, so the city of Kingston municipality itself. There was another question about whether the greenhouse gas emissions inventory pertains to the municipal operations only or the full city of Kingston. And in our current 2020 or 2012 climate action plan, there is an evaluation of the municipal operations and of the community operations, of the community greenhouse gas emissions. So that is all encompassed, and the information that Ben presented is the full community scope. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, correct. All the numbers that I showed were the full community of Kingston.
Right, great. I saw another question about how population comes into play here. We're currently operating, as my understanding, and somebody else who may know otherwise, please certainly chime in. But my understanding is that we're operating, that our population, we can only go based on the census. So my understanding is that we're operating that as though the population of Kingston is about 23,000 or so. And since the census data is not out or complete, my understanding is that we're actually still operating with that same 23,000 over time. So I don't actually know the impact of population through this, but that's a really good point to bring up that we can take a look at in our process. I will say that and this might be clarifying as well, is that when we are looking at the government operations data versus the community-wide data, we're looking at a different level of accuracy. So for the government operations, we have our energy bills. We know exactly what we spend on lighting. We know exactly what we spend at the waste, or how much energy we use at the wastewater treatment plant. We have graphs. This is all in the first climate action plan that outline how much each building uses, how much our fleet uses, all of those things, because we have energy bills to direct towards that. On a community level, we've had to use aggregated data, and so it's not specific to any individual one building or any individual one sector, as precisely as the government data. That is very difficult information for us to be able to gather on a community level, but it is something that we, with that aggregate information, are working towards reduction of that aggregate number as a whole. Let's see. Jess, if you guys are monitoring the chat, if there were other specific questions that were clarifying questions. A lot of these are really, really great about, I see great connections in here, people connecting to one another on specific, heat pumps. I saw a note there about heat pumps and connecting there. Some concern about plastics. Certainly that is something that all of us are aware of.
I don't know if we necessarily answered what can local businesses do to contribute in lowering their emissions. From Amy. And I don't know.
Right. So I know that one of the big, and if maybe Manna is on the call here, but one of the big initiatives that's happening on a county level is the Green Business Challenge. And so that is an effort to really spotlight and help local businesses to focus on what they can do, whether it's energy efficiency measures or renewable energy measures. And so connecting with the Green Business Challenge on the county level is a great idea. And what we also hope to see is that through this climate action plan, creating through this process a way for us all to do better. And so though we might not have the answer right now that says, right now you can do this immediate action, that's one of the things we really hope to get out of this climate action planning process is, it's a little easier for me to say, okay, as a City of Kingston employee, I'm going to go and change my LED lights in my municipal buildings. But where is that incentive for businesses, or where is that incentive in the community? And those are the sorts of programs and plans we need to figure out as part of this process. I saw some notes in the chat about suggestions for different rebates for different programs that currently exist or should exist. So these are all things that we are going to very seriously track and take as part of our input for this process, along with the information in the survey and in the poll that was done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very helpful. Yeah, we had another question from Lisa. Why are citywide waste emissions so low? And are we counting trash, especially food waste, that is sent to Seneca Meadows landfill? If that's a question, maybe we can get back to Lisa if we don't have the answer right now.
Unless Ben can speak to that in the numbers, we'd have to look at the numbers closer.
Yeah, so it's including all waste that's collected by DPW. So we have the monthly totals of tonnage collected by DPW. And then that does include some organic waste that's being collected as well. And then it's the emissions generated when that waste is landfilled.
And also just as, again, to just let people know, all of this presentation is being recorded. It will be posted at the Engage Kingston website. The survey is going to be there ongoing. We will be capturing all this information in the chat and following up for any questions that we aren't addressing currently.
Yeah, I think we have a raised. No, go ahead. Okay. And yeah, I think we do have a little bit of time that we can address, maybe a couple more before so there's a couple questions about the housing inventory and how, how we can work with low income community members. And that's something I know, several organizations that are nonprofit organizations are working on, like REPCO, and, city is offering incentives for that. But yeah, retrofitting is an important part of the project that I believe, Ben, if you want to talk to this, it's a crucial part of this plan that we, take account of the need for retrofitting our housing stock.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a lot of old buildings in Kingston, like a lot of places in the Northeast. So yeah, making those buildings as efficient as possible, both from like an envelope perspective. So how efficient the building keeps heat and cool air in the summer inside. And then also thinking about things like LED upgrades. There's a lot of ways to save energy. And then thinking about what sources of energy you're using to heat a home or business. Whether it's heating oil or natural gas or electricity that's getting cleaner and cleaner by the day as more renewables come on the grid. So yeah, there's a lot of different kind of components thinking about ways to reducing emissions in buildings, and we can kind of think through those in more detail as the process moves forward.
And I was wondering, Ben, just because of a diverse audience here, if you could define envelope and what that means for a building and for a building's sustainability.
Yeah, so envelope is kind of just the exterior of the building and how efficient a building is at either keeping heat inside in the winter or keeping cool air inside in the summer. So things like insulation and air sealing are pretty critical to increasing the efficiency of a building. And before you do any kind of sort of major upgrade to a heating system or cooling system, folks will always tell you to make sure that the envelope is as tight as possible. It's usually like kind of the easiest, most cost-effective way to reduce your energy consumption and reduce emissions associated with that energy consumption.
Yeah, thank you. Great. And let's see if we. Okay, so. So yeah, so there is some concern generally about energy bills and how that is going to be impacted by this plan. And hopefully at least better, not too much worse, I think.
Yeah, I think that's always like, a factor to keep in consideration. It's not just all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's, what's the cost impact to the local government? What's the cost impact to residents and local businesses? So definitely a key factor when you're thinking about any strategy. Want to reduce costs as much as possible while also reducing emissions. So really looking for those win-win strategies.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, and I think this would be a question perhaps for Julie, about where do things stand for the municipal composting program at this moment, and where do you see it going?
Sure. So for the last 2 years, the City of Kingston has been working hand in hand with the Hudson Valley Regional Council to do a 2-year analysis of the current status of food waste diversion, or what the new process could be for food waste diversion in the City of Kingston. And we are looking at 5 different components of how food waste could be diverted. One of which is in municipal buildings. The second at municipal events. So things like the St. Patrick's Day Parade or the Hooli or any citywide event. Looking at municipal meetings, if we happen to have food at meetings. Looking at a citywide compost distribution plan, if we went that direction, and looking at municipal curbside compost collection, residential and or commercial. So we have taken 2 years to evaluate what the current circumstances are. We've done waste sorts, we've done facility evaluations, we've done event evaluations and sorts. And right now we are in the process of drafting the final report. I am working daily with the Hudson Valley Regional Council to put that report together and the appendices of all of the information that we've gathered. We're working hand in hand with Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency and the Department of Public Works to understand how operations would work if they could. And so what will come of this in the spring will be a draft available to the public of an analysis and the feasibility of each of those 5 options for organics diversion. In the meantime, the county and the state have both advanced organics diversion laws. And so some of those are certainly moving forward into effect. And that is happening outside of our process, but we are evaluating that. And it is, I have meetings regularly updating the draft, moving forward and writing the draft. So we would expect to see a draft of that analysis and report out in early spring.
And thank you, Lisa Garay, for that question. And yeah, I guess I'll field a couple more questions from this group. And just to reiterate what Julia said, that we will respond to everyone that we missed by capturing this chat, and look forward to being in touch with you. And yeah, one question from Susan is that, building in on what we said, is that making sure that new funding possibilities for retrofitting buildings are worked into this plan, which seems like something that we can address in future buildings. There is a question specifically for Ben that was data presented about how much money it would cost to properly retrofit a residential home in Kingston, or build a new home with a super tight envelope, / passive house, solar, electric vehicle ready, battery storage, zero energy plus. So that's mainly a question about the data that you've been working with, Ben.
Yeah, so I didn't present on that topic, but I can kind of briefly comment on it. I mean, costs will vary a lot depending on kind of the type of building you're in. Generally, costs are cheaper when you're talking about new construction, when you're kind of like designing the building to be super efficient from the get-go. You can do things like upgrade the electric panel, or start with a larger electric panel to accommodate more electric devices. I just converted my whole house to electric heat pumps, and it does. There was some panel upgrades needed, so there's kind of additional expenses when you're talking about existing homes. And then adding something like a level 2 electric vehicle charger is not something my electric panel can currently accommodate. So that would be another expense if I went there. But so yeah, that type of thing is generally cheaper when you're thinking about it from a new construction design standpoint. But from the retrofit standpoint, yeah, it'll really just depend on a lot of variables, existing insulation in your home, the size of the home, the level of air sealing. So there's a ton of variables and X factors.
Yeah, and thank you. If I didn't cite you, thank you, Ben, and thank you, Hugo, for contributing that question, and generally all the work that you do too. So I think maybe we could just go through a few more questions, and then I'll pick up I think this would be a question for you, Julie, probably, like just based upon garbage. Has the city considered moving to garbage pickup every other week in order to reduce carbon footprint and cut staff and vehicle costs in half?
I will say, as part of, thanks for that question. As part of the analysis, we have looked at every possible scenario that we could do within our Department of Public Works for diversion. You know, we have just switched to dual stream recycling, so that's been a transition. We've looked at, as part of the process, we did an entire season-long tote analysis where we looked in everyone's totes to see how much content was in there, to see how full the totes were, and if we could go less frequently, or if we needed to go more frequently for both, for trash, for recycling, for paper and cardboard, for plastics and glass and metal. We've looked at what it would cost and the feasibility to add to take away one of those and add in food waste instead. In theory, you would hope that with 25 to 50% of our food, of our trash content being organics, the theory I would hope would be that if we divert enough, then we would have less trash, and then we could alternate compost 1 week or trash 1 week. This is all part of the analysis. We will come out with the recommendations in the spring, but we have limited manpower. We have limited access to vehicles, and certainly access to the numbers of days of the week. And so we have looked at all of this, and we've evaluated whether we would manage our own compost on site, whether we would ship it out, whether we would have people do it on their own sites, whether we would have remote locations or centralized, whether we would bring in another vendor to do it, whether it wouldn't work at all, whether we would do it in phases, whether we would do it by neighborhood. We've looked at all the possible options. So I hope that everyone will continue to follow that process and certainly weigh in on the draft when it does come out.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that there are a few follow-ups on composting and having community composting sites, and how we could make these accessible to local areas that are close to us, or easily within transportation distance.
Yeah, we've looked at sites. We've looked at temporary sites, permanent sites. We've looked at working with third-party composting companies to do it. All of this is part of the analysis. I'm so glad that people are excited about it, because I'm really excited about it. So that's great.
It's actually come across as like a pretty major theme in this, in people's interest. So that is really cool.
And I will also mention, as part of this, of course, the end product has to be considered as well. So if we were to manage our own food waste or organics, what would we do with that? Would we use it on city properties? Would we sell it? Would we give it away? Would we do, all of that has been analyzed as well.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
So I think, Jess, if you wouldn't mind doing our wrap up with our next steps.
I will. Thank you for the prompt.
Great.
Yeah, I will share my screen, and we will do a wrap up. And thank you all for the really, great questions that everyone has, and really looking forward to being in touch with everyone about these next steps and how we can proceed. Sorry, a second. So I think everyone can see my screen, and yeah, I'm just going to say that your feedback here and your feedback through the survey that we have offered and have shared is going to weigh heavily with the direction of this plan, and really help all of us involved get a sense of the priorities of the community and make sure that we're addressing those priorities. So it's really important it's really important to take yourselves, I hope, and share with people that community groups, people that you serve. And we're going to continue to make sure that you have access and have an easy link, which is in this presentation. So that's our first step as Citizens for Local Power. We're going to compile your survey results and share the feedback with Cadmus and the City of Kingston, and ensure that we have the greatest scope of community feedback that we can. And next to that is going to be hosting targeted meetings with speakers that are experts in some of these areas that we've already talked about. So for example, it sounds like from this meeting, we have a strong interest in composting and composting strategies. And from the survey that most of you took, that energy efficiency and retrofitting homes, and then green jobs are important topics that we would want to have targeted meetings surrounding, and make sure we get that feedback to the city and to all the planners involved in this project. And then we are going to continue to be in touch with you as you fill out the survey. Sorry about that. As you fill out the survey and provide your information, I think you did perhaps upon entering this this program. We will keep in touch with you. If you want, we will let you know what's happening, what the progress is, what the continued goals are of the Climate Action Plan. We will continue to let you know about meetings or other ways to get involved, to provide feedback, and to make your voice heard. And then we're going to continue to make sure everybody who should know about this, which is basically, it's our whole community. I mean, we all need to know about what's going on. And that's our mission, to make sure that we continue with mailings and social media pushes to make sure that everyone in the community is aware of coming changes and has an opportunity to express their opinion and provide feedback. And these are ways to be in touch. So we have our Engage Kingston website, which is part of the City of Kingston's website, which offers forums to comment and contribute to different topics that are covered by the city. This one particularly is for the Climate Action Plan. You can also follow Citizens for Local Power, and we will get in touch with you if you want to talk more about the Climate Action Plan or offer thoughts upon it. And also you can just get in touch with me directly, which is my email, the third item. So we are so very grateful for your time and for your participation in this outreach, and really welcome feedback. And then I think that's the main point of this meeting, aside from education, is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to provide their comments and thoughts that we can incorporate into a plan that encompasses everyone. So at that, I think I'm kind of good. Any other questions or anything?
I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank the interpreters who were doing an incredible job keeping up tonight, everyone for your time, and we're really excited about this. And I want to thank Jess and Ben and all of my planning team and the project advisory committee for helping to put all this together. So thank you so much, and check out engagekingston.com to follow up. Have a great night, everyone.